Today, I'm going to be reading Chapter 1 of The Finest Hours by Michael J. Tugias and Casey Sherman. Chatham Lifeboat Station. Boatswain's mate, First Class Bernie Weber, held a mug of hot coffee in his hands as he stared out the foggy window of the mess hall. He watched with growing curiosity and concern as the storm continued to strengthen outside. A midwinter nor'easter had stalled over New England for the last 2 days, and Bernie wondered if the worst was yet to come. Windswept snow danced over the shifting sands as large drifts piled up in the front yard of the Chatham Lifeboat Station. Taking a sip of his coffee, Bernie thought of his young wife, Miriam, in bed with a bad case of the flu at their cottage on Seaview Street. What if this was an emergency? What if she needed help? Would the doctor be able to reach her in this kind of weather? These questions were fraying his nerves, and Bernie fought to put them out of his mind. Instead, he tried to picture the local fishermen all huddled around the old wood stove at the Chatham Fish Pier. They would be calling for his help soon as their vessels bobbled up and down on the waves in the old harbor, straining their lines. If the storm is this bad now, what will it be like in a few hours when it really gets going? He thought. Bernie, however, wouldn't complain about the tough day he was facing. The boatswain's mate, First Class, was only 24 years old, but he had been working at sea for nearly a decade, having first served with the U.S. Maritime Service during World War II. Bernie had followed his brother Bob into the Coast Guard. It was not the kind of life his parents had planned for him. From early childhood, Bernie's father, the associate pastor at the Tremont Temple Baptist Church in Boston, had steered him towards a life in the ministry. The church deacon had even paid for Bernie to attend the Mount Hermon School for Boys, which was 105 miles from their home in Milton. Bernie was an outcast in the prep school crowd. He arrived in Greenfield, Massachusetts, a small town hugging the Connecticut River, with serious doubts and wearing his brother's hand-me-down clothes. He was not a strong student, but he privately questioned why he was there. Bernie knew in his heart that he did not want to follow in his father's footsteps. He was thinking about running away from the school when fate intervened. A childhood friend who had crashed his father's car came looking for a place to hide out. Bernie snuck his friend into one of the dorm rooms and swiped food from the school cafeteria for the boy to eat. The two were caught after just a few days, but they did not stick around enough to face the consequences. Instead, they fled to the hills and cornfields surrounding the school, before eventually making it back to Milton. Reverend Bernard A. Weber struggled to understand the action of his wayward son as young Bernie quit school and continued to drift. A year later, at the age of 16, when World War II was underway, Bernie got an idea that would change the course of his rudderless life. He heard that the U.S. Maritime Service was looking for young men to train. If Bernie could complete the arduous training camp, he could then serve the war effort on the merchant ship. He quickly joined up after his father reluctantly signed his enlistment papers, and he learned the fundamentals of seamanship at the Sheepshead Bay Maritime School in New York. When he was finished with maritime school, Bernie shipped out on a T2 oil tanker in the South Pacific. During this time, he realized that he would not spend his life in the ministry or at any other job on dry land. Bernie Weber had been born to the sea. He enlisted in the U.S. Coast Guard on February 26, 1946, and it was sent to its training station in Maryland. In letters to recruits at the time, the commanding officer of the Coast Guard training station summed up the life of a Coast Guardsman this way. Hard jobs are routine in this service. In a way, the Coast Guard is always at war, in wartime against armed enemies of the nation, and in peacetime against all enemies of mankind at sea. Fire, collision, lawlessness, gales, ice, derelicts, and many more. The Coast Guard, therefore, is no place for a quitter or for a crybaby, or anyone who cannot keep his eye on the ball. It is up to you, as an individual, to prove your worth. 10 years had passed, and Bernie was now on duty in Chatham. a tiny outpost at the elbow of Cape Cod. His worth and his mettle had been tested many times in the unforgiving waters off the Cape. It was one of the most dangerous places on the sea, because of the shifting sandbars and enormous waves. In fact, seamen referred to the area as the graveyard of the Atlantic, for good reason. The sunken skeletons of more than 3,000 shipwrecks were scattered across the ocean floor, from Chatham to Provincetown. Bernie Weber's first challenge had to come during an evening in 1949, when he responded to a distress call at the Chatham lifeboat station. The USS Livermore had run aground on Baris's Shoal off Monomoy Island. Bernie and the crew took a 38-foot boat over the treacherous shallow area known as Chatham Bar to where the Livermore lay with the Navy crew stranded on board. The ship rested high up on the shoal and was leaning dangerously on its side. Bernie and the men stayed with the destroyer for the rest of the night as the salvage tugs were called in. The next morning, the Coast Guardsmen assisted in several failed attempts to free the warship before finally achieving success and sending the Livermore safely on its way. Bernie smiled as the Livermore's crew cheered him and his crew. The sailors had given him a different reception several hours later when they pelted him with apples and oranges because, in their eyes, the rescue mission was taking too long. It was all part of a friendly rivalry between the Navy and the Coasties. Yes, the life of a Coast Guardman was oftentimes a thankless one, but Bernie would have not traded it for any other job in the world. And now, just after dawn, he gazed out the window of the mess hall, listened to the wind howl, and wondered what the day would bring. Thank you for listening.